So as of last night, or technically this morning, SAG-AFTRA has gone on strike with the Writers Guild of America. This obviously affects me and my acting career because the last couple of months, we really hadn't been getting a steady pace of work. Now since SAG-AFTRA has gone on strike, it's gonna be pretty much little to no work. So Dan Murrell has the story. Let's jump into it.
Hollywood loves a good sequel, or maybe it's a spin-off. Regardless of what it is, it's a second strike, and I've got all the information right now. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell, here to talk about the big news that is enveloping Hollywood, and it's really all Hollywood will be talking about until a settlement is reached, which is of course the actor strike, which began at midnight today. They are joining now the Writers Guild of America.
11,000 already striking film and television writers. Jesus.
On the picket lines. So we're going to be talking about why the actors are on strike, what the effects are going to be, and what the road toward a settlement might look like. But let's start first of all with a little bit of background about the people involved here. The actors in Hollywood are on strike, but they're part of a union called SAG-AFTRA. SAG-AFTRA is the merger of two different unions, SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, and AFTRA, which stands for the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. They merged back in 2012, and they cover similar areas. The Screen Actors Guild was usually covering film and television actors. AFTRA covered a lot of broadcast, TV, radio. So now they're kind of under one umbrella, and they're operating under different contracts. That's another thing. Not every member of SAG-AFTRA is on strike. It's only the members that operate under the contracts covered by the AMPTP, or the American Motion Picture and Television Producers. I know it's a lot of different acronyms, but I'll be calling them probably the producers mostly. And it's the same group that the Writers Guild of America also was not able to come to terms with, and the reason why they are on strike and have been for over 2 months now. And as I'm sure you've read, any actor who is in a movie or a broadcast narrative show or a streaming show is now on strike. But which members of SAG-AFTRA are allowed to work right now? Well, if you're a member of SAG-AFTRA and you work in the field of video games, audiobooks, the music industry, commercials, you're allowed to work, as are journalists and TV anchors who belong to SAG-AFTRA, as long as that work doesn't involve any type of work that would be covered under a regular narrative television or movie contract.
I see. So with me, I'm SAG eligible, so I have the qualification to join SAG-AFTRA. I haven't joined SAG-AFTRA just yet because I currently live in a right-to-work state, which means I don't have to join the union to get work, essentially. Since I'm in a right-to-work state, there's a ton of non-union projects that I can really, be a part of. And I know that if I join, then all that stuff goes away. I can't even do non-union work, and there's a ton down here. But if I were to move to like LA or something like that, I would definitely have to join the union.
Example, if you're a TV anchor right now, a news anchor in Los Angeles, then you can be a news anchor on Los Angeles TV. But if a studio says that they want you to come and play yourself in a movie, then as a SAG-AFTRA member, you are not allowed to do that because that is the part of the contract that is under strike right now. And it's this contract that has been the sticking point, which covers movies, narrative shows on broadcast and streaming. And negotiations have been going on for quite some time. They actually began back on June 7th, which was just a few days after the Directors Guild of America was able to strike a deal with the AMPTP, and this was something that concerned a lot of people in Hollywood. If you'll remember a couple months ago when I was talking about the writer's strike, at that time there was the prospect perhaps of a three-headed strike, that the writers would go on strike first, followed by the directors, and then the actors. Well, the writers did go on strike, but the directors were able to secure a deal. And if the actors had not gone on strike, then the writers would have found themselves alone on the picket lines and probably in a much less advantageous bargaining position, because the producers have not been to the table at all with the writers since the strike began. A lot of people have been messaging me saying, why haven't you given any updates on the writer's strike? It's because there's no updates to give. It is glacial. It is frozen in ice. There has been no progress. The writers are just on the picket lines with no end in sight, which is something that we'll discuss in a few minutes.
I really think that they're trying to like wait the writers out. And I feel terrible for the writers. I feel like they should be paid. Now, this is only a sliver of what the writers are demanding, and rightfully so, but having AI write the scripts for these movies is ridiculous. Or like fill in the blanks for the screenplays is madness, man. Madness. I can't believe they are even entertaining that idea. No AI is gonna write a script better than a human being. To me, it just sounds incredibly greedy.
Directors were able to get a deal with producers that they were happy with, but that didn't necessarily mean that the actors would be able to do the same thing, and after a promising start to contract talks, they began to break down. However, there was an extension to those contract talks. It was originally supposed to expire on June 30th. There was a 12-day extension to July 12th. SAG-AFTRA has been very open about the fact that they felt that this was a legitimate extension to the negotiating time, and they say that they went back to the table, but that the producers didn't show up, and they now feel duped. They feel that the producers asked for that 12-day extension in order to have another 12 days to promote their summer movies before all of the actors went on strike.
That's
and
what
if
they
you've
did.
seen how many Barbie premieres there were in the last 12 days, I think that that theory might hold a little bit of credence. So the AMPTP, the producers, we know them from the Writers Guild strike. They are an alliance of the heads of the major studios and streamers as well. So the head of Warner, the head of Disney, the head of Netflix, and they basically negotiate as a group in order to come to terms with actors, directors, and writers separately. And these deals are usually negotiated every 3 years. Most years the negotiation goes fine. Some years there's the threat of a strike, and then every once in a while, one or two of these groups will go on strike. However, they usually go on strike in different years. It's very uncommon for more than one of the actors, directors, or writers to go on strike, and the directors particularly have almost never gone on strike. The current president of SAG-AFTRA is Fran Drescher. Yes, that Fran Drescher, known to people of my generation as the nanny. She, along with the executive director and head of the negotiating committee, Duncan Crabtree Ireland, have largely been the public face and voice of SAG-AFTRA throughout this process.
You cannot change the business model as much as it has changed and not expect the contract to change too.
So what exactly was it that SAG-AFTRA was asking for from the producers? Well, let's break it down a little bit. Like the writers, the actors were also asking for an overall increase in pay across the board, as well as increased residuals from streaming shows.
As they should.
The request for increased residuals for streaming is because there are fewer episodes on streaming, and because the actors wanted to be able to financially participate in the success of a show on streaming, which is not really how the system's set up. There's not really a performance-based residual system in place at all. And again, this is something that the writers have wanted to address with the producers as well. And as far as the overall increase in pay, again, that's linked to the fact that shows now have fewer episodes per season and fewer seasons overall, which means that it is tougher for actors to make a living on a television show, and also just as an adjustment overall because of inflation. AI is also a huge sticking point for the actors, as it has been for the writers. The writers don't want AI to be used to write scripts, and the actors want very restrictive guidelines placed on their likenesses and when AI can be used to use their images and how they can be compensated for those images, or if they can grant approval for the use of their image. One thing that is specific to actors with this contract negotiation is the use of something called self-tapes. And it all goes back to COVID, when the casting offices were closed, when you couldn't put a bunch of people in a room together for an open casting call. Then actors started recording themselves reading the script pages that were sent over to them.
Bro, before COVID hit, I was going out to auditions like every week. Every single, like, work was booming before COVID. I mean, we would actually have to go inside the rooms with like the producers or whoever's like a part of the commercials, and we'd have to do our scenes in front of them, which was pretty awesome to me. But ever since COVID hit and the pandemic and all that craziness happened, we had to send in self-tapes now, and to me, it made it way more tougher for the actor. In-person auditions were better because you can actually make a connection with the cast and director. And for like lesser known actors, that's golden. And also, I think you will get some feedback, which is really important for actors, because Nowadays, when we do self-tapes, we get no feedback. We don't know how good we did. We don't know how bad we did. We don't know if they chose somebody else because of this reason. We don't know if they didn't go with us because of this or that. We have no idea. Just radio silence. So in in-person auditions, the cast director might say, you did pretty good, you did good, or they might give you some notes. That's so valuable because you can take that piece of information and apply it to your next audition.
They would record it and send it to the casting directors, and that was called a self-tape. Basically, you record yourself, and it was something that was out of necessity because you couldn't go to a casting office. There was nothing that was happening in person.
Right.
The issue that actors have now, though, is that now that COVID restrictions have lifted, many studios are still using self-tapes because it is easier than the traditional audition process and cheaper as well. You don't have the overhead. You don't have a casting office. You just send the pages to an actor and tell them to record themselves and then send it to the casting director. Well, the actors are saying that this is actually disadvantageous to actors for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're doing a lot of the work that casting directors would do. Also, they don't get the opportunity to interact with casting directors or perhaps even other actors, which they say is an advantage to their career. And also, they say that this puts up a technological barrier and perhaps even an economic barrier for actors who don't know how to do this technology or can't afford technology to send in a good self-tape. So they're looking for a way to go back to the more traditional form of auditioning. There were some other issues on the table, and there were some things that SAG-AFTRA has said that they caved on. For example, they initially were seeking to have actors compensated for when a movie is re-released. They say that they dropped that issue in the spirit of negotiation, but that was not reciprocated. So what exactly was so far apart about the actors and the producers and their stances on these issues? When it comes to the overall increase in minimum payment, SAG-AFTRA says that the producers tried to use the deal that they gave the directors against actors, basically saying, well, we gave the directors this percentage increase in their minimum payments, and so that's all that we're going to give you. And the actors said, well, that's great for the directors, but we're not the directors. And this was one reason why a lot of people in Hollywood were upset that directors took a deal with producers, because they were afraid that this very thing was going to happen, that the director's deal would be used as a template for the other unions and would undercut their negotiating power. Now, I'm not necessarily saying the director shouldn't have made a deal with producers. It went to the entire guild. They voted to not strike because they were happy with the terms, or the majority of directors were. But it is kind of unquestionable that them making a deal did weaken the bargaining power of the other unions who are now on strike against producers. On the issue of streaming residuals, the AMPTP claimed that they offered some concessions when it comes to higher residuals for performances in international markets, not domestic, as well as higher residual payments for guest stars. But that's not exactly what SAG-AFTRA is looking for. The actors were looking for the establishment of a completely new system in order to calculate streaming residuals. Now, in a press conference that they held yesterday, SAG-AFTRA claims that they knew that the streamers would balk at the idea of releasing their streaming numbers. That's what everybody said. Streamers will never release those numbers. So the actors claim that they came up with a compromise solution, which was to use a third-party measurement system when it comes to the performance of streaming shows, so the streamers wouldn't have to release their own analytics. They could look at the reports from this third party who's able to measure viewership and say, like, okay, well, if we accept that this is how the movies are doing, or the shows are doing, then this is what we'll base our residuals on. But apparently the streamer said, well, no, you can't do that because those numbers aren't reliable because they're third-party numbers.
This was their...
Then release their streaming numbers. If they would just release their numbers, which I'm sure they're making some pretty good money, we would have a good idea just how much actors should be paid off of residuals alone. But it's obvious they don't want to do that.
Distraction tactic to try to avoid engaging on a totally legitimate proposal. And from day 1 to day 35 of these negotiations, we never got any substantive response to that proposal.
So basically, it seems like the streamers are saying, we won't give you our numbers, but we also won't let you use someone else's numbers because they're not reliable. Our numbers are more reliable, which you can't have.
That's so stupid.
Regarding AI, the producers at the AMPTP claimed in a press release that the actors walked away from what they considered to be a groundbreaking proposal about compensating actors for the use of their likeness. But at their press conference yesterday, the actors claimed that this groundbreaking proposal constituted an offer to scan the likeness of a background extra, the people that you see walking around or sitting in the background of a movie or a TV show, that basically they would scan their likeness, pay them a day rate, but then the studios would own the use of that likeness in perpetuity to use however they want.
Oh, hell no. You mean they get to scan some background actor, which they don't get paid a whole lot of money, and they get to keep their likeness forever? Hell no. If you're gonna keep my likeness forever, if I was a background actor, you better pay me some serious cash, because you get to keep that for the rest of my life. Even if I was a background actor, I still wouldn't be cool with that.
So you would basically own the scan of a person to put in any kind of movie or use it for any purpose, which they said may have been a groundbreaking offer, but certainly was not the offer that they were planning to take.
So if you think that's a groundbreaking proposal, I suggest you think again.
Finally, on the third major issue, which is the self-tape auditions, producers claimed that they offered to cut down on the use of self-tape auditions, and instead that they would allow actors to do virtual auditions or in-person auditions. But SAG-AFTRA claims that this was just that, an offer, that there was no enforcement or any kind of guarantee, that it was basically the studio saying, hey, we're going to do better, but without anything other than trusting their word. There was no real system in place. While SAG-AFTRA has said that there was some early agreement on smaller issues or room to compromise with the producers, it's also very obvious that they are far apart on the major issues. And even after federal mediators were brought in for the last day of negotiating, there could not be an agreement reached. So yesterday, the National Board of SAG-AFTRA voted for a strike to happen, and that strike officially began, as I said, at midnight, which means as of right now, no member of SAG-AFTRA is allowed to participate in any kind of activity that is covered under the contract, which has now expired, with the producers at the AMPTP. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means that actors hit the picket line starting today alongside the writers. So if you live in Los Angeles or if you live in any area that has a major studio, you're going to see a big uptick in the number of people that are picketing outside of those studios. And as for the actors themselves, obviously no on-camera work is allowed in any capacity for a movie, broadcast, or streaming narrative program. That also means that any movie or show using SAG-AFTRA actors that was currently shooting, movies like Deadpool 3 or Gladiator 2, is essentially, as of this moment, shut down. I asked for your questions about the strike over on the social network Threads, where I have an account and I'm kind of ramping up my activity there as I get the landscape, the lay of the land. And by far the most asked question was, when will we as moviegoers start to see the effects of this strike? Or when will my favorite show on television or streaming start to be delayed? And that's a great question. The answer really is that it's a bit of a snowball effect. The longer this strike goes on, the bigger the impact will be. If they can settle the strike next week, then the delays will be minimal. But if this goes on for 2 or 3 or 4 months, then we will start seeing major delays on projects like, for example, Beyond the Spider-Verse. It's been pretty much assumed that Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse was not going to make its release date next spring. But because it reportedly had not finished recording voices, or perhaps not even started recording voices, and now those voices cannot be recorded until after the strike, then it is very likely that that movie is going to be delayed. Any movie that's shooting right now, like I said, Deadpool 3, if this goes on for 2 or 3 months, those movies will likely be delayed. And then
I just saw on Instagram they're definitely delaying Deadpool 2.
Then we have movies that are still in active development, because casting now cannot happen while the strike is going on. In many ways, in a kind of way, this is kind of a repeat of the pandemic. At the very beginning, people thought, oh, theaters might be closed for a few weeks, so we'll take our May release and we'll push it to July. And then as things kept going, they're like, you know what, we're going to take it out of this year entirely. We could see something very similar to this depending on the length of the strike. Jesus. Now, there are a few high-profile exceptions to all actors not working for shows like House of the Dragon. House of the Dragon is a show that is produced entirely in the UK, and actors in the UK work with a different union. It's called British Actors Equity, or Equity. UK labor laws actually prohibit unions over there from striking in solidarity with other unions. So even if Equity wanted to say, hey, we stand with our actors in America and we're going to go on strike, legally they could not in the UK. And there are members of SAG-AFTRA that are working on projects under Equity contracts. They can also keep working because those shows are not under the SAG-AFTRA contract. They are under an Equity contract. SAG-AFTRA has also said that there is a pathway through the union to get approval for truly independent projects to advance. So this would be a movie, for example, that has no connection to any studio that has a contract with SAG-AFTRA. They could potentially be able to get a waiver to go, but these would be the smallest of movies. Non-narrative programs like reality shows and game shows aren't covered by the contract, so those are still fair game, as are talk shows, except that talk shows aren't on the air right now because of the writer's strike. And even if they were on the air and an actor was to go on a talk show, they couldn't talk about any movie that they're currently in or have been in or that they could be promoting. So Margot Robbie, for example, couldn't go on, let's say, Stephen Colbert if he came back on tomorrow and talk about Barbie. And that's because promotion of upcoming projects is another thing that's expressly forbidden under strike rule.
You know, man, maybe I'm optimistic. I don't think the movie studios can afford to have this strike go on for months and months. I mean, you're talking about some serious delays and some big budgeted movies, you know? But to me, I don't really see them losing out on all this money that they could be making, you know?
That means no walking the red carpet at a premiere, no for-your consideration campaigning for the recent Emmy nominees, no appearances at film festivals or award shows, no press junkets to talk about upcoming movies, and no convention appearances, which means that San Diego Comic-Con, which already doesn't have a lot of its marquee talent as far as Disney or Marvel or anybody else going there to do big Hall H panels. Unless the strike is settled in the next couple weeks, there will also be no celebrities there if they're a member of SAG-AFTRA to promote anything that they are working on. So Comic-Con may actually have to be about comics this year. Actors are even prohibited from promoting their projects on social media. And we've already seen the fallout from this. Yesterday at the Oppenheimer premiere, the stars of the movie literally left the premiere once the strike was officially called in solidarity with the union so that they would not be seen promoting what is essentially now a struck project.
Damn.
In addition, actors are not allowed to audition during a strike, nor are their agents allowed to negotiate on their behalf for a part during the strike, which means that all casting essentially comes to a halt, and this is where it affects a project like Superman Legacy. James Gunn already could not write or revise his script during the writer's strike, but we've seen all of this news about casting come out because he was still allowed to cast the movie. Well, that stops as of today because no actor can audition and no agent can negotiate and no actor can accept a part in any kind of a movie or TV show, which again is going to hurt the development of movies like Superman Legacy because they're basically stuck in limbo to fill all of these roles until the end of the actor's strike. If the writer's strike was like a hand grenade in that the effects when it comes to the entertainment industry were times to go off a little bit down the road, then this actor's strike is like Wile E. Coyote pushing the plunger down on TNT. It just blows everything up immediately. Now, it would be theoretically in everybody's interest to reach an amicable deal as soon as possible, but that doesn't necessarily look like it's going to be in the cards. The funny thing is, this actually isn't the first time that the actors and the writers have gone on strike together. Back in 1960, the actors and writers went on strike at the same time, and that got both guilds compensation for movies that were replayed on, at that time, the new technology, which would be television. It also got extra added pension money for the writers and the establishment of the pension plan for the Actors Guild. At that time, at least in part in 1960, the president of the Actors Guild was Ronald Reagan. And this was an example of two guilds going on strike, having similar interests, and both of them being able to settle their dispute with producers to their mutual satisfaction through their combined power.
I don't know, guys. I really think this all just comes down to just greed, you know? It's just beyond me that the studios don't want to look out for the actors and the writers that actually make them all that money. We may not get everything that we demand from this strike, but I hope that we come to a reasonable deal, you know? So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and make sure you support Dan Mural. And I'll see you guys in the next reaction video. Peace!